Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development with another episode of Sales and Cigars. So today our guest is Nate Tutas, and we are continuing with our series about how to think about sales. So without further ado, let's welcome Nate Tutas to the program. So Nate, welcome back to Sales and Cigar for our monthly conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be back.
So we've been talking about various aspects of what salespeople should be doing, how salespeople should be thinking, how sales managers should be thinking about their role and what they're doing. And we've had some feedback about, from salespeople that have listened to it, and they find it helpful. What I'd like to do is sort of continue that from a different spot, pivot a little bit, because I was looking at some news reports this morning, and it's not a matter of if, but when we have a recession in this country. We can't have 3 or 4 months of inflation, gas prices going where it is, double-digit inflation. So, I started to see large organizations missing their earnings for Q1. And I think the other shoe is going to drop here in the next 2 or 3 months, where those big companies that are missing earnings are going to do what they always do. Cut.
Yep.
Lay people off. Cut costs. Spending freezes, right? And one of the dumb things that they always do is cut in the sales organization, and that's the organization that generates revenue, right? So, after that happens with the big companies, it trickles down to the mid-market companies, and then the smaller companies. It just happens all the way down.
Mm-hmm.
And they all do the same thing because they're a bunch of sheep or lemmings, right? And they've done it over and over. So that's my little stump speech. And we know it's coming, and I want to start helping companies, CEOs, salespeople, sales managers thinking about what they can be doing today, because it just seems like a lot of people are just, it's probably going to come, but let's wait and see what happens. And that, to me, is crazy. It's like we're just going to wait for that bus to come over here and hit us.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we get really close and we can step out of the way. So I think there's some things that companies should be doing, and I'd like to run a couple of ideas past you, and then like let's go. We do what we always do: just kick the ideas around, and you clean them up and make them better.
Sure.
That's what you do. That's usually what happens when we have a conversation. So, but I think where we start is at what companies should be talking about, what their messaging should be. Marketing's part of it, but from the perspective of salespeople, they need to be saying things to their customers and to new customers. So can we kind of jump off there as to what that sounds like, and what that, what their messages should be at a high level?
Yeah, at a high level, as you and I were talking about before we started recording the podcasts, I was on a mastermind last week with Dean Graziosi, and one of the things that he was saying in that mastermind, he was referencing back to the economic times in 2007, 8, 9, and that whole time frame. And we've had many recessions since then, but we haven't had a real major one like that since then. And one of the things that he shared in that mastermind group was that the marketing messaging, and even our messaging as salespeople, needs to shift from aspiration to life preservers, because that's what people are going to be looking for. You were obviously around through a couple of different recessions. I was around. I started my sales career in the recession in going into 2007-8. And so I can remember at that point, people were looking for life preservers. They were looking for, how can you help to save my business? How can you help to save the things that we're looking for? And so I think one of the big things is, and it's kind of interesting because from a sales messaging perspective and what should be in those messages, it's really doubling down on what we should be talking about all the time, which is the customer, and entering the conversation that's going on inside of their head and how we can help to serve them.
So that's 100% true, right? We're beating the same drum that you should be in front of the people, talking to them about what they're concerned about. But since so many people haven't experienced just one recession, I mean, I've gone through several, but not most, a ton of salespeople have not experienced what they're about to experience. So that message needs to shift a little bit. As you know, you're using the metaphor of a life preserver. To me, that is, we need to be really helpful, and we need to be crystal clear about what it is, that what value we're going to bring to our customers and our prospects. How are we going to be that resource? And I'm going to shout out to Dave Curlin. That's one of the things that he talks about, that we should be the resource. We should be the differentiator for our customers as salespeople. We need to be that difference for them, to provide them value.
Mm-hmm.
So, from your perspective, we can't get into every industry, and we can't get into every little market segment, but we can talk about what that life preserver idea needs to sound like, or how do we go about finding that information? Because you have a tool that you represent membrane, um, that we represent membrane to a degree from a partnership point of view, and there's some really cool, powerful, scary sometimes information that we can pull out of there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can we talk about that a little bit in terms of what that means to this life preserver idea?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is when you dig into the data, one of the things that we track is everything. It's not just one thing; it's just about everything that we're actually tracking. And so, one of the things that you can do is you can look at win-loss analysis and figure out what reasons are people actually buying from you, and what reasons are people giving you that they're not purchasing from you. And so that just right there can give you a lot of data, especially when you can segment it down to a specific time frame to see, okay, how has the win-loss reason shifted over the last 90 days, 30 days, whatever that time frame might be, and be able to really start digging in and seeing, okay, when we're not following the steps properly, when we're not really truly building value with our clients, when we're not showing them how we can produce ROI, when we're not showing them how we can provide cost savings or help to increase efficiencies or any of those areas, we're losing more of our sales. And that's something that we see consistently across the board. Anytime we go into someone's instance and we review numbers with them, that's something that we see. So one of the big things is really getting an understanding of what is driving the needle, what is helping customers to move forward, and then shifting your messaging and your marketing messaging, your sales messaging, everything to be around that, including existing customers that you have today, which we kind of talked about, but going in and building that value for them now so that when it comes time for them to make some of those tough decisions and some of those tough cuts, they're already looking at you as a value-added supplier that they can't afford to get rid of, because you're seen as someone that's going to help them to actually get through to the other side of whatever's coming our way.
Because your message is one of, let's figure out where you are, what do you know, what do you see coming, what is your management telling you, and then how can we support what directives your customer has, right? That's really what we're talking about. And I think salespeople shy away from those kinds of conversations because they don't know how to have them. Um, but I think it's much more fundamental in that they don't understand the value, and they don't put any weight on that. That if you really understand somebody's problem and you have a desire to help them, your chances of being a resource goes up exponentially if you understand their problem. And that requires you to talk about, I mean, what are we struggling with here? Where are your where are your friction points? Where do you see problems coming in your business? How do you because you are in the packaging business. I mean, delivering their product to their customers is a big piece of it. So what can you do that will help them be more efficient, right? Packaging can be efficient.
Yep.
Packaging can be inefficient. Um, so maybe we shift some of the resources from the cool, pretty boxes with all the brands on it to something that's a little bit more pedestrian, and we save resources. I don't know the business as well as you do, but if we're not asking those penetrating questions about what's really going on, what are you afraid of, how do we help? I mean, you can't, right?
Yeah, you really can't. And I think part of it goes down to as well is, and you and I talked about when you start in a recession, you kind of have this resilient side of it built in. But I think one of the other things that salespeople miss a lot, and I did this when I was in packaging, I did it when I was in fall protection. I would ask the question, hey, who was here during the last recession? Who in your company was here when that happened? Can we get them in a room and can we ask them some questions? And oddly enough, they were always excited to come in and share that experience. But I was always interested to say, hey, the last time a recession happened, what specifically happened in the organization? Where did you guys try to cut? What worked? What didn't? What did you guys do that you found out, we really shouldn't have done that? Packaging was a major area, especially where you could come in and you'd get a packaging engineer that had been in a company through a long period of time for whatever reason. And they would come back and they would be going, yeah, one thing we learned, we could cut costs by reducing the size of a sidewall or reducing the inner packaging, I'm blanking on my terminology now, but on all the stuff that you put in to protect the product, we can reduce that, but there's a limit because we ended up having more returns. We ended up having all of these additional issues because we cut the packaging down so much that the end product didn't get to the customer in one piece. And then we had customer support issues and the whole fallout.
Pissed off customers.
Yeah. And what's great about those conversations, I literally just got to sit back and just twiddle my thumbs and listen. And they did a lot of the selling for me because when they left, whoever I was working with, the general manager, the plant manager, the packaging engineer, whoever it was, would look at me and go, okay, Nate, how close can we get to that, but not hit it? And then I was the one that got to help shape what that value conversation was to say, okay, here's kind of our limitation points. If we go below this, there's a massive risk. And you have to determine, does the cost outweigh the risk? Where do you want to go with that?
But it's about digging into that conversation, pulling the gray hair from the organization, right? In your story, which is brilliant, right? Like who's been here, who did it? That's what management should be doing. Like that's what the CEO should be doing, right? Who was here in 08 and 09?
Yep.
All right, let's get lunch in a room and let's just talk about, couch it as war stories, but let's do those penetrating questions to make sure that we understand where the mistakes were and that we avoid all of those and where the good stuff was, and we start working on that today as we get ahead of our competitors.
Well, and the other major thing that comes out of that as well. So I've I'm 36 now, so I'm not as young as I used to be, but I still have a bit of a baby face. And I used to go into some of these meetings with executives, and they would be looking at me going, yeah, what experience do you have that you're going to help us out with? You're starting in the recession. You haven't been through one. You don't know what we're dealing with. But when I could walk in and they could be, firing ideas back and forth about how we were going to handle this problem or how we were going to handle that problem. And I could say, hey, you know what? I've had a number of these conversations with a lot of my customers, and I can't share who said what, but here's a couple examples of what other customers have mentioned. The risks they took, the payoffs they got, the danger that they fell into, whatever that might be. And there they would look back and be like, wow, that was really valuable. We hadn't thought of that. You're bringing us experience that other people have gone through. And that's where Scheringer Morgan talks a lot about how companies don't always work through the entire change management process, and each hand in the company isn't talking to the other, and how there's always that miscommunication that occurs. This is especially a time where that occurs, where companies aren't tapping into that resource. They're not going back and saying, okay, who's been here, who's gone through it, what can we learn, and how can we move forward? So if you as the salesperson bring that value, even just to kindle and start that conversation for them and get them thinking that way, you become a huge resource that, when times get tough, they're thinking about how they can keep you around, not how they can get rid of you.
Exactly, because you're providing ROI, because you're providing value. And the cool thing about being in the sales role, biz development, whatever we want to call it, is that we don't necessarily need the answer.
Mm-mm.
We need the question. We need that question to be able to ask them to go down the path and then listen to that conversation so that we can interject with product knowledge, market knowledge, experience, and ask other good questions or tough questions that allow the right solution to percolate up to the top. Because I don't think anybody in that room, right? If you imagine you have a room of all those people, nobody can say, here's what we're going to do,
Mm-hmm.
and be confident, truly confident. But if everybody enters that room, it's like, all right, what did we learn last time we did this?
Mm-hmm.
What did we know? What worked? What didn't work? All the things that you went through. That salesperson can literally just be the conductor of the orchestra.
Yep.
And allow all of this to play out, and then know when to say, hey, Bob, you haven't really contributed here. What if I get the feeling there's something that you want to say, and then pull out that little kernel and then summarize. And it's really facilitating smart conversations and getting the right people in the rooms.
Mm-hmm.
It's not difficult to be resourceful and to be that value. It's those skills of being consultative and being able to ask a good question and then listen.
Yep.
Right? That's really all we're doing if we're being effective. Actively listen to the answers and then have good questions that are conversational along the way that really open it up. And not so go back to your point earlier. This is what we're supposed to do all the time.
Mm-hmm.
As salespeople, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well,
and we're rehashing it from a different perspective. But if you don't do that now, because the last few years there's been pent up demand, there's been supply chain issues. Like I want it in blue, you can't have it in blue. All right, I'll take it in green. Right?
mm-hmm.
There's just been a lot of that.
Yeah.
Now, as we enter this recession, if we don't have the right skills as salespeople and sales managers, you're going to get crushed.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, our customers, especially over the last few years with the supply chain shortages and issues and stuff, they were under stress. Now they're going to be under that stress multiplied. And if you're in a position where you're seen as a time waster and not someone that they look forward to coming in and adding value, you're going to be out the door real fast. The other thing is, what's kind of interesting is there's a phrase that Tony Robbins uses that says it's not necessarily a lack of resources, it's a lack of resourcefulness. And one of the things that I actually like about these times, as sick as that may sound, I am a Marine, so we have different ways of thinking about things. This gives you the opportunity to have those conversations when you wouldn't have been able to have them before. Like, one of the things that I love about this type of a scenario is you can go in and you can get the gray-haired individual to come in and share their experience, and then you can facilitate that conversation and say, okay, what did you guys try before? Great. What worked? What didn't work? Follow up to that. What will you do now if that happens again? Or after you got out of the recession, what things changed? Oh, we went completely away from what we did in the recession because we didn't have to do that. So none of those things are in place anymore. Cool. Do you have an easy solution to get that back in place? No, we have no idea how we would do it. Okay. Is that something we should talk about? But you can get into all those different kinds of conversations where the opportunity to have that dialogue isn't there the way that it's going to be, and isn't there with the urgency and the emphasis that's going to be there now, versus if you were trying to have that conversation when everything's hunky-dory and there's no issues or concerns around a recession. They're going to look at it and be like, well, why would we work? Like, good times are good. Like, we don't need to worry about that kind of stuff. Now you can have those conversations and really dig in and challenge and say, okay, if that was to happen again, how would you handle it? Oh, we do the same thing that we did before, or we learned a lot from that. We'd have to do it differently. How would you do it differently? We have no idea. Like, that's really what you're going for, is how do you uncover those golden nuggets that you then as the salesperson can provide that value back, in those conversations.
Well, and then you have to execute and be able to provide the solution, but that's a whole lot easier when they've told you what the solution is.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's agreed that we need to do A, B, and C, and we need to do it fast. And we've created value just by coming up with a solution, and then we create even more value by executing on that. You've cemented your space.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we landed and we went through, like, this is an opportunity to save, to dig in deeper, to really be with an account and be everything you're supposed to be. And I think what we need to do in our next segment here is to talk about what we need to do, what companies need to do that for new companies, for new logos.
Mm-hmm.
So before we wrap up this segment, is there anything that I forgot that we should bring to the table here about creating that value and being that resource and providing that message of, we're the life preserver?
Well, the one thing I guess I would add, because we talked about it before we started recording, and it plays into how you get those new logos, is document. So as you're going in and you're providing ROI and you're building out use cases and you're implementing those things, I had shared with you before that when I was in packaging, our larger customers, we didn't do this with absolutely everybody, but our larger customers, we would have quarterly reviews with them where we would go in and we say, here are the projects that we were working on last quarter. Here's the results that we got from those. Either they were still in the implementation phase, so there hadn't been any results generated yet, or here's the things that are getting hung up that we need your help to kind of drive forward, because we as a company can't push through some of the corporate politics and that kind of stuff. So how can you help us to move those forward? But then we also were sharing, here's the things we did and the ROI you're already seeing and the expected ROI next quarter. So we were sharing those things in advance, and each quarter they were getting an update from us. So when it got to the end of the year and we did a big summary of all that stuff, there was no question of, were we going to lose the business? Was someone else going to come in and undercut us on price and all those kinds of things? Because we were in that constant communication with the customer and at the executive level too, because the executives loved being brought in on those meetings to see what's my investment doing for me. I authorized you guys going and purchasing that new machine. I want to know what it's actually doing. What's the return? So doing that now, if you're not doing that, starting to implement those types of reviews, starting to figure out how can we communicate the value that we're already supplying to the customer. Because when push comes to shove, what you want to have happen is that when those executives get in a room and they're saying, okay, where can we cut? Whoever your champion is in that organization is going, we can't cut this vendor, and here's why, and puts the documents down on the table. If they have nothing there to give, they're going, well, we shouldn't really, we really can't afford to get rid of them. Well, why not?
Yeah, we have to help give them. We have to help them tell the story.
Yep.
In most cases, we have to give them the story, and what this message is timely because we're coming to the end of a quarter here in June, right? And now's the time to get that on the calendar with your bigger customers, especially the ones that are 30% of your revenue. Get in there, figure out how to structure that review, and figure out how to demonstrate value, because it's not always crystal clear. We got to figure that out sometimes, but that's part of our role. You get help from your sales leader, right? You get help from your CEO. This is what we've accomplished. How do we tell that story, and then go do it. And as the bottom starts to fall out here, and I hate to say to be negative, but that's what's going to happen. You're better prepared to. Even if you haven't been doing it, you're better prepared because you've already started. And next quarter is going to be even scarier because people will start to wake up, right? They just, this company's earnings missed and that company's earnings missed. And we're talking about major corporations that missed their earnings by a lot. And they're driving, they're a leading indicator. Like when a major grocery store misses their earnings, how do we, and they're always looking at, people I'm thinking of are always cutting their costs and looking for the best deals. If they're struggling, this is going to go quickly. So it's a great way to end that segment. Get in front of this, have the right conversations, be the life preserver using Dean's message. And start to talk about it. Talk about it with your customers. Talk about it with the things that you post and the things that you share. Talk about what it is that you can do to be a resource, and then go do it. That's the key.
Yep.
So, all right, Nate. As always, good conversation. People can take actionable ideas away from this, and that's always our goal.
Yep.
So thank you again.
Thank you for listening to Sales and Cigars with Walter Crosby of Helix Sales Development. For more on sales and cigars, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Sales and Cigars, produced by thepodcastproshop.com.